Good evening. Welcome to the special meeting for School Board of Independent School District 271 Bloomington Public Schools. Today is Monday, December 21st, 2020. It is 6 p.m. The meeting tonight is being conducted remotely via Hangouts Meet. It is being live streamed by BEC TV and will be replayed per the usual BEC TV replay schedule. Let's go with roll call. So all board members who are present, please indicate that you're here. Director Bibi?
Here.
Director Bennett?
Here.
Director Olson?
Here.
Director Sorum?
Here.
Director Starks?
Here.
Director Steigaff?
Here.
And Corman's here. So all board members are present tonight. I would like to move approval of the agenda.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of approving the agenda for this special meeting, please say aye. Director Bibi?
Aye.
Director Bennett?
Aye.
Director Olson?
Aye.
Director Sorum?
Aye.
Director Starks?
Aye.
Director Steigaff?
Aye.
And Corman. The agenda has been approved. And the one item that we have in the agenda today is response to governor's new executive order. Superintendent Les Fujitaki.
Thank you, Chair Corman. Good evening, board members and viewing audience. Last week, our governor released the new executive order that addresses schools. In response, the school board chair Corman called tonight's special school board meeting so that administration could present their interpretation of the new executive order and present recommendations in response to that new executive order. Chair Corman also called the school board meeting so that the board could possibly take action in response to the new executive order. I'll start by providing background information that is intended to help the board and the viewing audience understand how the governor's executive orders provide guidance for schools. In July of 2020, the governor issued a new executive order. Following that executive order, the Minnesota Department of Education and the Department of Health published a safe learning plan for the 2021 school year. This document provides guidance for all Minnesota public schools in dealing with the pandemic. This document is part of our governor's Stay Safe Minnesota plan. The Safe Learning Plan is updated usually with the issuance of a new executive order by the governor. Last week, a new executive order was issued. Accordingly, the Safe Learning Plan was updated, prioritizing the reopening of elementary schools, ending the pause of organized youth sports, and other factors. Our district's practice is to comply with this guidance while collaborating with the Bloomington Public Health Services to study COVID health data and health best practices. We started our school year in compliance with this guidance and consultation and have continued to adjust our programming to be in alignment with these evolving guidelines and changing COVID conditions. Our district teams have studied the latest updates to the Safe Learning Plan, and we will present tonight our findings and recommendations to the board. The recommendations are in a resolution that is in your packets. Please consider referencing the resolution as you listen to and process the presentations and related recommendations. Please feel free to ask questions after each presentation. With respect to prioritizing the elementary schools reopening, Dr. Jenna Mitchell, our Assistant Superintendent, will facilitate the presentation of our findings and recommendations. Dr. Mitchell, please.
Thank you, Superintendent Fujitaki. Good evening, Chair Corman, Superintendent, members of the board, and viewing public. I'm going to present some information, as the superintendent has said, around shifting our model for elementary education, including an update of where we're at currently. So the objective of this presentation is to review first our decision-making tools. This will be a review of some of the slides that I've shown you in the past, and then we'll also do a review of the state's guidance, and then, just as Superintendent Fujitaki has said, an update on elementary, secondary athletics and facilities. So first, our decision-making tools. Just a reminder that first we have a dial that we've shown you before. And in essence, what we're looking to do is try to place the dial at a place that makes sense for our district based on lots of different data points. We might be in distance learning, we might be in hybrid learning or traditional learning, and it might differ by level. When we review the data, we might take a look at that data and decide that we would want to consult with the Department of Education, Department of Health, and then we're very fortunate we have the Bloomington Public Health as well, department that we can collaborate with. We also take into consideration what our families' preferences are, and we do that through surveys or other ways to gather information from them. And then we might make a recommendation as administration to the school board for action. If a recommendation is made, board may take action. And if they do, from there, we communicate and we implement. So you can see our process is reviewing the indicators, the data we have, doing consultation, creating a recommendation, presenting that recommendation to school board, and then communicating next steps. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those pieces in just a moment. So with regard to the data that we would review, we have a model movement matrix that includes data indicators in 5 key areas: physical health and safety, high quality learning, school and district operations, supporting all learners, and social and emotional learning, or SEL, and mental health supports. So this matrix has several data points that help us know if we're ready to shift models from, say, distance learning to traditional learning or hybrid to traditional learning. We summarize those data points on something that is called our model movement dashboard. This is a condensed version of that larger matrix and something that I'll show again tonight. Again, folks have seen it before, but essentially what you're looking at are a summary of the data points within each of the categories and indicators marked either green, check mark, on track, yellow triangle, we need to intervene, or it's an area of challenge or potential challenge, and then red, meaning likely requires some delay. Tonight, what we'll be presenting to you is, with regard to elementary, is the potential to move from distance learning to traditional learning. And what you see here on the dashboard is the indicators that point to our readiness to shift from distance learning to traditional learning in each of the 3 levels. Because this report is focusing primarily on the elementary grades, I'll be focusing on that column that starts with the yellow triangle and then has the green, again, yellow, green, and so on. I'll talk about specifically each of the areas, and we'll get into a little bit more detail around some of the things that you still see as yellow and what some of the potential challenges might be to shift to traditional learning in those areas. First, a little bit more information about our state guidance. So Superintendent Fujitaki mentioned that there was a new executive order last week that prioritized elementary students in classrooms. Here's some language from our most recent guidance, which states that based on Minnesota's evolving knowledge and understanding of the virus, the Safe Learning Plan has been updated so that early learning in elementary schools reduce the use of county data as a singular determining point when considering their learning models, and mitigation strategies are increased to help get students back in classrooms while keeping students, families, educators, and staff safe. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit when we get into the physical health and safety category a little bit more. The guidance also suggested that January 18th would be the earliest that schools currently in distance learning could begin in-person learning at the elementary level. And then, of course, we must always, we must also continue to have a distance learning option for the families that choose that. In-person learning needs to be implemented, if it is to be implemented, on a rolling start strategy. So we can implement up to 3 grade bands at a time into a building, must wait 2 weeks, and then can implement the next series of grade bands. So for example, kindergarten through grade 2 might begin on the week of January 18th. 2 weeks later, we could move into the grades 3 through 5 in buildings. As was mentioned, you'll hear more in just a little bit about some of the new health mitigation strategies. And the guidance has also said that we must use at least 2 days of preparation time to shift models. There's also some guidance around lunches and specialists. And so we'll get into a little bit of that right now. I'll just say before we move into talking about each of the 5 indicators that we're in the early stages of planning what a transition would look like. Of course, we've done a lot of planning and thinking, but there are still some things that we're working out. And we're still getting new guidance from the Department of Education on a regular and ongoing basis. For example, even this morning, we've gotten some new guidance that we're processing. So we may not have all the answers to very detailed questions at this time, but know that we've done a lot of thinking, and we're feeling like we're ready to implement in the areas that we'll discuss in just a minute. So I'll start with physical health and safety. I'm going to hand it over to Hannah Hatch to share a little bit more about some of the indicators within physical health and safety. Hannah?
Thank you, Jenna. Good evening, members of the board. I'm just going to briefly review with you the new plan and additional mitigation strategies that were released by Governor Walz last week. So when we talk about elementary going back to a traditional model, some of the things that will be added are additional PPE. All staff that are in direct contact with students now must wear a face shield and mask or face covering. The masks and face shields that are required now for staff that are in direct contact will be provided by the state. If staff are going to be within 6 feet of students, they cannot maintain that 6 feet of social distance, then an additional barrier, such as a plexiglass barrier or something like that, needs to be provided to help provide an additional barrier to COVID-19. In addition to that, the bus drivers must maintain 6 feet of distance from students who are getting on the bus and are sitting on the bus. We are still awaiting more guidance in terms of student loads for the buses at this time. Additional guidance that has come is that students now must wear face coverings during indoor physical activity. Prior to this time, when they were in hybrid model, they were allowed to remove their face covering for Phy Ed class or indoor physical activity. Now they must leave the face coverings on during that time. And then, as Jenna mentioned, there are some changes to mealtime and specialists. So all mealtime and specialists must take place either outdoors or within the classroom. Of course, in January, going back, that will be in the classroom in Minnesota until weather is nicer, but in the spring, it would be the option to also be outdoors. With the mealtime and specialists, there are some exceptions to this guidance. For instance, if you have a cafeteria that is large enough where classes do not need to intermingle at all and they can be spread out and maintain appropriate distance, then there are some options around that. Okay, the next strategy that's been put in place to help get back into a traditional model is COVID-19 testing for all staff that are having direct contact with students. So what we know about this testing is that training and saliva test kits and supplies will be provided by the state. They will train in some of our staff to administer COVID-19 tests. Each district will have an assigned date that they will be receiving the test kits so that the rollout will not be all at once, but you find out when your district starts the testing. Staff will have the option of being tested every other week. They will be encouraged to test for COVID-19, but they are not required to take this test every other week. And then the testing that's conducted every 2 weeks will be on a designated day. So we will find out what day our school district will test staff, and that's when all staff can receive their COVID-19 test every 2 weeks. All right. Those are the additional mitigation strategies that have been put in place to provide safety for staff and students coming back into a traditional model. Along with this, we will continue to consult with the Minnesota Department of Health and Bloomington Public Health and our other medical advisors. That will continue to happen even with this new plan that is being rolled out. The Safe Learning Plan also continues to require schools to consider all aspects of safety when making these changes. With the new guidance, we want to be clear with you that we still do anticipate having staffing challenges. Staff can be in the building and maintain that 6 feet of distance, and we can staff it because students no longer have to maintain that distance and can be in the classroom. However, we do anticipate having some staffing challenges because we are going to be doing these large amounts of testing every 2 weeks. What we've learned about these testing programs is that when you roll them out and you're testing a large amount of staff, when you initially start testing, you will find quite a few cases where staff are asymptomatic or didn't know that they had COVID-19 or thought it was a different symptom or a symptom of something else, and we will see a large amount of positives in the beginning. What we hope will happen is after the first few rounds of testing, that dies down and it will help control the spread among our staff by testing every 2 weeks and catching it early on. With the traditional model, we also anticipate that our case count will increase, including isolation, the confirmed or symptomatic students, and quarantine or close contacts. Right now, because we're in distance learning, we try to capture as many as we can, but of course, we're not capturing all of them. So when all students are in school, we do anticipate those numbers to increase quite a bit. The other thing you should know is that because students do not have to maintain that social distance within classrooms or possibly on the school bus, if there is a positive case, we would need to quarantine the whole classroom most likely for 14 days because that social distance has not been maintained. And that's kind of what determines if a student or someone goes into quarantine. So what this new model is providing is that students will be in cohorts within their classroom. But again, if a student becomes positive in that classroom, all those other students would need to quarantine because that social distance is not being maintained. With that, I'll turn it back to Jenna.
Thank you, Hannah Hatch, for that update. Talk about a couple of the other indicators that you saw and the categories that you saw them within. The next area was high quality learning. So just briefly, I'll mention again something Hannah was just describing, which is that staffing is going to continue to be a challenge for us. We noticed that staffing was a challenge in the hybrid model, and specifically right before we switched to distance learning, we saw it was becoming more and more challenging to staff classrooms and cover classes because we had staff who were quarantining or isolating. So we anticipate this to continue being a challenge. The other piece of this is substitute teachers. So right now we have 196 substitute teachers who are registered with us, but it's fewer than we've had in years past. And we recognize that other districts are potentially shifting to traditional models over the next couple of weeks as well. So we know we'll be sharing that substitute pool with other districts. So that's why you saw yellow as the indicator under high quality learning. Staffing, we anticipate, will continue to be a challenge. Additionally, if we're to shift to a traditional model, we anticipate there may be other staff who decide to take leaves, and so we'll need to backfill those positions by posting a long call reserve. It's just another piece of that staffing process. In terms of programming with high quality learning, if we shifted to a traditional model like we are proposing here tonight, we would be moving to a 5 days per week model. And again, we would do that phased in approach that was described in the guidance from the state. So our early childhood programming could start on that week of January 18th. Our grades kindergarten through grade 2 would start then the 19th, and they would run through the 29th. So 2 weeks later then we would have grades 3 through 5 joining them, with essentially grades kindergarten through 5th grade starting on February 1st. And that's how we would propose that phased in approach. I'll just mention, you see here the date of January 19th. One thing to note, if you've looked at our calendar for the 2021 school year, you know that January 18th is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So that's a day that is currently a non-instructional day on our calendar. You might also notice that January 19th is a professional development day. So one other thing I'll mention about that is what we'd be proposing here tonight is shifting that January 19th professional development day for the elementary staff that are non-BOS elementary staff. And so then they could start right away on the 19th and have that professional development day at a different point. If we look at school and district operations in the indicators in that category, you saw all greens. And so meals, meal services, transportation, those areas need about 3 weeks to prepare for a shift to traditional learning. They feel they can meet their goal if there's board action tonight. Also, they'll need to do some planning and prep for meals potentially served in classrooms when that 6 feet of distancing can't be maintained in the cafeteria. So there's some planning to be done there. And then with regard to communications, we know that we need to find out more about what families' preferences will be, recognizing this is a different model than we've implemented so far this year. So we would do a parent preference, we're saying, and calling it a registration, December 22nd through 30th. And that would be for all early learning and elementary parents to find out what families' preferences are with regard to either coming back traditional or participating in education in a distance learning model. With communications, there will also be ongoing information as plans are finalized, and continuing to update that preparedness plan for staff and the return to learn guide for parents and the safe learning plan guidance. Also under school and district operations is childcare and early childhood. So for that update, I'm going to hand it over to Executive Director of Community Ed, Jake Winchell.
Thank you, Jenna. Good evening, Chair Corman, members of the board. As Jenna mentioned, I'm here to talk to you about early childhood and childcare and how we fit into this latest news with this latest executive order. As you know, early childhood has followed the K-5 elementary system in the learning model that they have been in. So currently we're all in distance learning in early childhood as well. One thing that you may have read is that the first guidance came out, said grade bands K-2 would be the first ones that be able to come back. An update came out today stating that if an early childhood program is self-contained, either in its own building, like we do with some of our programs, or in an elementary school, if they're self-contained, they are able to open back in-person learning starting as early as January 18th. So with that, we would like to reopen our early childhood programs, starting with ECFE, our earliest learners. We'll continue to offer kind of a hybrid approach in those programs. We have found that some of the online classes have been popular with families, but we'd also bring families back in person as well. Preschool and Early Learners Academy would also return to in-person learning starting January 19th. Pre-K would open at all regular sites, and Early Learners Academy would open at Hillcrest and Poplar Bridge. This was dating back to the fall. We did consolidate down to 2 sites. In the past, we've had 3 sites and are looking to expand to a 4th in the future. But due to numbers, because of the pandemic, we were just at the 2 sites, and we had to anticipate operating at just the 2 sites as well when we reopen. Childcare continues to be open. Currently, right now, we are only offering care to Tier 1 workers, Tier 1 families of Tier 1 workers. And we would again open up to all families. Depending on demand, care may be consolidated to fewer sites. That's one of the things we saw this fall, was we had to offer before and after school care at fewer sites and then bus kids to different sites just to make it work with staffing and also just to be responsible financially as well. If that was the case, we'd consolidate down to a handful of sites such as Poplar Bridge, Hillcrest, and Valley View Middle School. That concludes my report. I'll turn it back to you, Jenna.
Thank you for that, Jake. So the next area that I'd like to talk through is supporting all learners. In this area, you also saw a yellow as the indicator, and this is because our family preferences aren't yet known to us with regard to this potential shift to a traditional learning model. So we really need families to choose a model that's right for them, either distance learning or a traditional model. And so we will plan to send out that registration, as was highlighted earlier, toward the end of this month. Students enrolled in Bloomington Online School will, of course, continue in Bloomington Online School. And with regard to support services, I'm going to ask that Chris Christensen, who works specifically with special education services at our elementary level, provide a little update for us there. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mitchler, and thank you, School Board, for giving me a couple minutes to talk about special education. I just wanted to highlight that both myself and Joanne Ramler, who is our elementary special education coordinator, will be working very closely with each elementary principal and their special education teams to create schedules to meet the needs of all of our students on IEPs. And scheduling is going to be particularly important because our special education staff will be providing services both to students who return to the in-person model and to those students whose families chose to remain on distance learning. So we do not have separate staff for the distance learning model and the in-person model. So scheduling is going to be important because our staff are going to be providing services through both of those models. So we will be focusing on safety for both students and staff, obviously, when we are working on our service delivery model, particularly when we are grouping students and designing how and when kids are going to be receiving their services. So the bottom line is that we're going to do our best to provide as much high quality instruction as we can to all of our students who are on IEPs, and we want to do that as safely and effectively as we possibly can. So that's all I had, Dr. Mitchler, so back to you.
Thank you for that, Chris. And with that, I will hand it back over to Superintendent Fujitaki.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchler. Please recall all school districts get guidance from the Safe Learning Plan. The secondary school section of the recently updated Safe Learning Plan remained relatively unchanged. The only changes dealt with mitigation strategies. Because the guidelines remain unchanged, middle schools and high schools will continue to follow the ongoing protocols and parameters listed in the Safe Learning Plan to determine the learning model that they're going to operate in. I'm going to call on Dr. Nick Kelly, Administrator of Bloomington Public Health Department, to provide an update on case rate information and other pandemic information. Dr. Kelly, please.
Superintendent Fujitaki, Chair Corman, and school board members. The data you have in front of you is data as of today of the 7-day rolling average of cases per 100,000. We were able to clarify the axis a little bit so you can see the months a little better. But you can see we did have our second peak, and the hint of a downward trajectory the last time I talked with you has become a clear downward trajectory. This puts us right now at 54 cases per 100,000 as of December 14th. When you look at the metric that we are traditionally using for school, cases per 10,000 over a 14-day period, we're at 99 per 10,000 right now. The 7-day moves faster than the 14-day. This trajectory in the 7th day gives me confidence that we are heading clearly in a good direction for seeing a lower case level, and knowing that the state guidance is not allowing any change really until mid-January. This makes me much more comfortable with the elementary restarting in that time frame. You've heard me talk a little bit before about the differences we see by age group. So our data, national data and international data show that there's some unique differences in transmission dynamics, especially in that 5 to 10 age range. That doesn't mean we won't see cases, but it means we're more confident that we're not going to see the kind of transmission that we do see at some of the high school or in the secondary level in school settings, just because of the social interaction those students have. Cohorting these students, additional PPE that Hannah talked about for the teachers, and the testing are some additional layers that give us confidence that the strategy laid out by the governor in MDH and MDE provide a good opportunity to bring students back into the classroom, and balancing the reality of teaching and providing education in a pandemic with the need for that early developmental education in the classroom. And so it's a good balance, and the process of staggering that works really well to protect public health. And then it's also exciting to think about further down the line in the coming months, the vaccine will become more and more of a reality. And so it is a sound public health approach on that end. And as Hannah also talked about, as you're bringing students back, you will periodically see that quarantine issue pop up. And so on the secondary end, I don't know exactly when we're going to get back down to the numbers that are going to allow secondary to go back. But the numbers are clearly going in a positive direction that, and with the state's guidance, make it a good direction from a public health standpoint for elementary. And then at some point in the future, can certainly have that conversation about secondary.
Does that conclude your report, Dr. Kelly?
It does, Superintendent.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Kelly. Based on this case rate information provided by Dr. Kelly, our recommendation is that our middle school and high school programming remain in distance learning. In the resolution in your packet, it references resuming middle school targeted services programming. This is an after-school program at our middle schools, and this program would resume when our middle schools shift out of distance learning. Again, we will continue to monitor case rate information and report back to the board with updates. Please also recall the governor's executive order ended the pause on organized youth sports. To present their findings and recommendations with respect to athletic and activities programming are Jefferson High School AD Chad Nyberg and Candee High School AD John Anderson. Gentlemen, please.
Thank you, Superintendent, and everyone and the board. As part of the guidance given by the governor, youth sports, including high school sports, may resume practice on January 4th. There is not a start date yet given for when games will be played, but the Minnesota State High School League intends to start the winter season for all the sports that have not started yet on January 4th. We would look to have that as a target date to start our winter season for most of our athletics, as well as to resume our activities, which have already started. All programs need to submit a COVID-19 plan to have in-person practices or rehearsals. Many of our programs have done this already, and they've been approved by the nurses at each site. All programs will be expected to follow their plans very closely, which align with the guidelines from the Minnesota State High School League, as well as guidance from MDH. And athletes and families will all be strongly encouraged to follow those MDH guidelines outside of practice, because that is when we were seeing the most spread happen amongst our athletes and our students in our activities. Thank you.
Okay, anything from AD Nyberg? Is he here? He's probably not here.
Yep.
Okay.
No, I'm here. Hey, that's a shot. I'm here. John said everything. It's good. I'll take the questions as they come.
Okay, thank you. All right. Jake Winchell will present information about facilities.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent Fujitaki. As you just heard, we have talked about reopening facilities for youth sports and other activities. And as you know, there have been gyms have been allowed to open up this past weekend. So we are looking at our facilities, and we have come up with a timeline on when we could reopen our facilities and how they see fit. So looking at the activity centers, starting on January 4th, we will look at reopening the walking track at the activity centers. And we have measured both walking tracks, and they measure 14 feet in width and 15 feet in width. In the guidance, when working out, when exercising, users must remain 12 feet apart. So it's going to be very, very tight. That means that if someone is walking on the track and they're passing each other, they got to be on the exact opposite ends of that walking track. But we do think we can make it work. So on January 4th, we would reopen those walking tracks to Bloomington residents only. We will come up with a schedule for that, and possibly even a schedule for times of the day when it's open for walkers and times of the day where it's open for people who want to run, just to reduce the amount of passing by of people who are working out. Weight rooms would reopen when we can meet mitigation standards. Currently, we can't responsibly do that. As I mentioned, you need to remain 12 feet apart while actually exercising. And with a walkway, and we would only be able to allow a small handful of 5 to 7 people in the weight rooms at a time. Plus with cleaning standards, it's just not possible at this time to reopen those weight rooms. A date to be determined would be opening for non-Bloomington residents. At this time, we're going to remain open for just Bloomington residents to help do our best to reduce the spread. Go to the next slide. From there, we'll talk about rentals. As you heard, youth sports and basketball practices and those things may start again starting on January 4th. So we'll open those basketball courts to youth sports. And in the future, the guidelines haven't been updated other than they said that youth sports can resume on January 4th. So in the future, we would phase in our opening. We would allow competition whenever the State High School League and other guidance comes out saying that competition is now available. Again, we're going to restrict this to just Bloomington-based organizations. So we would not open up the facility to tournaments where we have teams coming from all over the state to come compete. It would just be local Bloomington teams at this time to practice and then at some point to compete internally. And again, in the future, we'd scale ahead to medium scale rentals, which would be public gatherings with maybe a crowd, a small crowd with limited capacity. And finally, the last phase of this opening would be activity centers and buildings reopen for large scale rentals, which you see a lot in our activity center because of the great setup. We host lots of basketball tournaments, dance competitions, auditorium events with an audience. That'd be the last stage to reopening. Again, this guidance, other than saying that youth sports can resume practice on January 4th, there's been no updates that we have seen yet. So this is our own phased-in approach that we are looking to employ as we reopen the activity center and rentals. That concludes my report. Back to you, Superintendent Fujitaka.
Thank you, Jake Winchell. Jake is our Executive Director of Community Education. This concludes our presentations. I hope the board and the viewing audience can see how earnestly and hard the team has been working on interpreting and coming up with these recommendations. In fact, we're so excited about making this presentation. We're all remiss in allowing the board to ask questions at the end of each presentation. So I'll turn it over to you, Chair Corman, so we can field questions from the board and hopefully address the resolution that's in the packet. Chair Corman?
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you to members of the staff, and thank you, Dr. Kelly, for being here with us tonight too. It's a very detailed update, so I'm grateful for the work you've been doing for the past week. I mean, before that too, but you know, in relation to this specific order. So before we address the resolution, what I would like for the board to do is to ask the questions. So any questions, board members? Director Bennett?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and I want to thank everyone for all their hard work on getting this presentation ready in a short couple of days. My first question is for Ms. Hatch. When you were talking about that we have testing available for staff every 2 weeks, will that testing be available before school starts on the 19th so that we'll know if there's any asymptomatic teachers, or are we not going to get that until later?
So thank you for your question, Director Bennett. The state did release their first training today. There's still a lot of questions that we're working through in regards to testing specifically, because this is very new to our staff and district and things like that. From our understanding of the guidance, it sounds like the testing would start on January 18th at the earliest. So unfortunately, no, that would put us at starting the first week. We do have the Ridgeview testing site that would be available if staff wanted to go prior to school starting and be tested. But at this time, the way we interpret the guidance, we would not have tests available until January 18th.
Okay, thanks. And I would assume that once school starts, that Ridgeview testing site's gonna end?
Correct. It
Okay.
will continue the Friday before school would begin.
Okay, thank you.
See, other questions, Director Olson?
Okay, yeah, so Governor Walz asked that students be serviced in their own classrooms, but he also said that he respects that, our school communities can make decisions, make based on our unique communities. And so I have a couple thoughts here. The specialists I've heard from have said that they are more comfortable possibly in their larger classrooms rather than coming to the various classrooms because they have more space to have the students, music and art. The other thing is that when I have substitute taught, when the students leave for lunch or for specialists, that's an opportunity to, air out the room, clean the room, take off the mask briefly, eat with this. Teachers are not to gather in the teachers' lounge. So I'm wondering where the teachers will be going when if they are going to be in the room with the students the whole time during specialist time and during lunchtime. I would like to know if they are going to be then in the room the entire time or if they have a place to go. And also if the specialists will have any input as to if they feel safer having the students come to their classrooms, would that be an option? Thank you.
Dr. Mitchell, can you field that question, please? Questions?
Yes, I can. So Director Olson, thank you for the questions. I will say this is an area that the principals and I have been meeting and discussing, recognizing the challenges there are specific to specialists. Just as you mentioned, specialists provide opportunities for students to leave a classroom and teachers to have their prep time to prepare for the next lesson they're doing with students. It's also one area that we continue to get updated guidance from the state. So it's hard for me to say right now with absolute certainty what we'll be doing, but we will be following the guidance from the state that they recommend in terms of what we need to do in order to create a safe space for both students and for staff, working within our contractual guidelines to ensure that teachers still get their prep time that they need. I wonder if Hannah Hatch or Rick Kaufman might have anything more to add with regard to that comment. I know you were a part of a conversation earlier this morning with MDE where this maybe came up.
Sure, I can add some of that. So in the MDE held a meeting this morning that provided additional clarification. So there's a couple of things to think about with respect to the specialist teachers. The whole idea of bringing students back is to obviously for their academic and mental and well-being, but it's also important that we maintain those classes separate from each other. So there's no commingling of different sections of second or third or fourth grade. So suggestions that were considered are if the single section, so a single second grade or a single third grade can meet in the music room or the art room for that instruction, that is something that we can consider. That's something of guidance that MDE has provided. If that is not feasible, there is some consideration for those specialists to provide virtual learning so that they don't contaminate multiple classrooms. As Ms. Hatch talked about earlier, the idea is to reduce the likelihood of greater exposures to students in multiple classrooms. So the idea of virtual teaching for the specialists, for those students to remain in their classroom, to eat in their classroom, is the most ideal approach.
Thank you, Rick. And I'll just add, we recognize too, I'm sure folks are watching and thinking that poses new staffing challenges, and we're also aware of that and trying to think through how we can move forward. So thanks for the question.
Thank you. Director Starks.
Well, I'll ask a follow-up to that, because one of the questions I was going to ask today is how are we going to protect the teachers' prep time? I'm really concerned. When I first read that students weren't leaving the classroom, that was the first thing as a former teacher that I thought of, is that's not feasible. That's not feasible at all. So has there been any talk about shortening our school day so that the teacher prep can be done, you know, after the school day? Is there any conversation about, well, another question I could ask, because this is in the same line, is the discussion that revolved around whether we were doing 4-day a week or 5-day a week. By losing that Wednesday, you know, it's also another pressure point for teachers. So if someone could address that in more detail, how you're going to protect teachers' prep, and then what other potential opportunities or options are out there to approach that situation.
Again, Dr. Mister, can you help, please?
Yes, I can. Thanks for the questions, Director Starks. So, you know, first, just as I was kind of saying earlier, this is an area where we continue to look through the guidance. And again, the guidance is developing from the state. So trying to get that guidance as quickly as we can and work through some of our planning. We recognize and want to also maintain all that teacher prep time. We want to, you know, make sure we're providing teachers what they need in order to be successful. So, recognizing that and recognizing how important it is for us to have students in buildings, you know, we have to work within the situation that we have. So what I might actually ask is, we have some of our elementary principals here with us tonight. I wonder if Paul Meyer, if you could speak a little bit to just in a building, what it looks like to protect some of the teacher prep time in shifting to a traditional model. Is there maybe one or two things you could share with regard to what this might look like as we're starting to implement?
Good evening, board chair and Superintendent Fujitaki, as well as board members. We've been meeting last week. We met today. We're meeting tomorrow, and we're still planning on how we can do that. I know, as far as eating wise, that we're looking at ideas of, do we use the lunchroom for teachers to go and eat? As far as prep time, we're still trying to figure out, like, how do we find a different space for them to go? We still are working through this. The main thing is we're trying to get the guidelines that we need to figure out what we're to do. And we're still working on that, as well as we're trying to gather that. We want to wait to get the information from families to see what they're selecting or choosing to what model. And so right now, our brains are spinning and we're talking and we're throwing ideas out there, but we haven't really landed on things yet, because this is something that there's so many like domino effect, where you make an adjustment, then you have to adjust elsewhere. So we're taking the time to think through, and we want to get that done. And we're going to be working. Like I said, we've worked previously. We're going to work a little tomorrow, and then continue to monitor things and think things through and talk. But these are those challenges that we're trying to figure out and get ideas. And the thing is, we want to have kids in school. That's important, to get them back to school. We also know it's very hard on families, and that people are staying home and they're doing the best they can. We also know it's hard on teachers. So we're trying to work together to find the best possible way to educate the kids. We don't have all the answers, but we're working on getting those solved, and we have to work together to try and figure that out. But far as the prep's concerned, we're still working on ideas with that, because we're still waiting for the complete guidance on where we're at.
Thanks, Principal Meyer. I'll just add one other thing too, is that in some ways, I think we feel a little bit like we did maybe in August or end of July, where we got guidance from the state. There was a lot to process, and we wanted to make sure that we were following that guidance. And one of the pieces of that process for us was looking to the districts that are near us in the metro area to see what they're doing and how they're doing some problem solving. And so that's something we'll also try to do. You know, Director Starks, you had mentioned a couple of ideas yourself, and so we'll be looking to other districts, looking for ideas. And as Paul said, we'll be continuing to process as a group as we come up for solutions to that challenge.
Chair Corman, I'm adding to that. I was on conference calls with the MDE and MDH this morning and this afternoon. The same questions came up about specialists, about prep time, and it's a common problem. And districts are seeking guidance from them on what kinds of flexibilities the state's going to provide for all this, such as shorter days and all these other things. We're hoping to get some guidance from the state in the coming days. We have to the 18th, and the state knows this, and they're working on responses to these questions. And as soon as I get those responses, I'll get it to the school board and to all of you.
If I could say one more thing, and that is exactly it, Superintendent Fujitaki. We are still trying to figure out what our guidelines are. How far, like, can they be 6 feet? Can they be 3 feet? Because things have changed. And for us to set something in place and all of a sudden they change it, it's so difficult to have those final conversations. So we're throwing ideas around. We're in the brainstorming part, and then we're going to start to land on stuff once we get the data from the parents' choice document that we're going to be sending out, as well as get guidelines from the state.
Thank you. What I can see here is it's a clear intention of having our kids return to the classroom, but still, depending on those specific and complete guidelines from the state.
Chair Corman?
Yes?
It's Andy Kubis here. I just wanted to add a little bit more to that, if I could, as a former principal, elementary principal. What I valued about this principal group is they are great problem solvers. And from when situations came like this, when I was a principal, oftentimes the solution isn't universal. It can't be applied across every school. Sometimes you can find the solution at your own site. As an example, the way that we ran recess at Valley View Elementary School was very different than they may have at Ridgeview, just based on the staff members we had, the amount of students that we had, the amount of sections. And I would hazard to guess that a lot of these solutions, although we're waiting for the details, as Paul Meyer mentioned, a lot of these solutions will be dependent on each site, but teacher prep time is contractual. It's important. It will be preserved.
Thank you. And it's so great that we have such a bright group of principals and bright group of teachers as well and staff members. So it is important as we move forward, if this is approved, that you are working together to find the solutions, the answers to those questions. Let's see, Director Sorum.
Thank you. The traditional approach of 5-day learning, is that going to be all students going in at the same time, for the schools on the buses and showing up? Or is there going to be, I thought I heard it mentioned somewhere, it'd be a 4-day week with Wednesdays being off? Or are they going to have cohorts in the buildings, or are they just going to be, 25, 24 students per class every day?
Director Sorum, the plan is for 5 days a week. That is the proposal. And I'll call upon Dr. Mitchell again to respond to your other parts of the question. Dr. Mitchell?
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Director Sorum, for the questions. So what it would look like is a 5-day-a-week model, as the superintendent said. Any of the families who are choosing to come back when they fill out that form that they'll receive could come back in the traditional model. Families would still have that option to choose distance learning. If we look at our numbers previously, we know not all families choose in-person learning. And so we'll likely have some families who don't decide to come in for that traditional model. Depending on how many families choose, then we may have anywhere between, we could estimate from the last survey that went out, 60 to 80% of our families choosing to come in for in-person learning. And that varies again by school as well. And so what they would then have the opportunity to do is come in. They would not be keeping 6 feet of distance between students, but we would be keeping the distance for the adults from the students. So that 6 feet between students is no longer a requirement. Buses would be similar, and so there wouldn't be distancing required on the buses. I wonder if Hannah Hatch or Rick, you might have anything more you want to add with regard to the health guidelines for that.
Sure, I can jump in. So just with the changes that have taken place to allow a traditional model, as Dr. Minchler mentioned, we will no longer have students be doing the social distancing within the classroom. 3 feet is recommended as feasible, but there's no longer a requirement within each classroom to maintain the 6 feet of distance. Now, that still applies to all our staff. The teacher would be required to maintain the 6 feet of distance from the students and from other staff. That being said, with the transportation, we're still gaining some clarification on how many students can be on a bus at a time and what would qualify as needing to quarantine the bus and things like that. But from reading the plan as we interpret it, it would be traditional busing coming into school where students would not maintain that 6 feet of distance, but they would need to maintain that distance from the bus driver. As was mentioned previously, the purpose of this is to, as you've heard mentioned before, cohort the students. It's just that the cohort would essentially be their classroom and their teacher. That would be the full cohort. So it's to keep the students within that classroom, however many students are in there, to prevent the spread in that way.
If I can add a little bit to this as well, when we were in hybrid for about a month or 4 or 5 weeks, I can honestly tell you that the children as well as the teachers did a marvelous job of following guidelines. I saw one child in those 5 weeks walk from the classroom to another place without a mask, and that was in those 4 weeks. Now, I know that it's not perfect, that it may happen here and there, but I can tell you the children really responded well to the staff, and the staff did a very good job of keeping their distance. Lounges were not used like they normally are. People took turns. So I'd like people to understand that staff are doing a very good job, did a very nice job with that, and students, and that they understand that in order to make this work, we have to work together. And we're doing it. We're going to figure out how to best utilize things and plan things out for the children, so when they come back that they are safe, as well as our teachers.
Okay, let's go with Director Bennett.
Yes, thank you. Kind of follow up on Director Stark's question. Well, kind of. Well, I guess rephrase this. Okay. So in the past, when we had a hybrid, if the kids were in quarantine, the same classroom teacher was responsible for the learning of those children, and they would pretty much plan for that service delivery on their asynchronous days on Wednesdays, and that's when they could check in with those students. So if teachers are going to be in class Monday through Friday, are they still going to be responsible to implement those learning to the kids that are quarantined, or who's going to be responsible for that?
Superintendent Fujitaki, Director Bennett, I can take that question. So you're right, you've outlined what the past practice has been. So we've modeled it after what we've done before COVID came around, which was if a student was out ill due to, whatever, flu, something like that, then a teacher would be providing them work to do outside of the classroom, and they wouldn't be meeting with them virtually in any sort of real-time way. So we've modeled our past work around that within hybrid. You're right. I will say this is one area that we haven't discussed in detail yet about how we will do that if we transition to a traditional model. We can imagine, as you've outlined, that it will be probably a challenge for staff to be able to keep up with students who are isolating or on quarantine and out, and providing them the work that they need. Doesn't mean we won't do something to support. I think there's a lot of, as you've heard here already, a lot of planning that we can do to try to set folks up for the most support we can provide and for success. But you have highlighted an area that we need to continue thinking about, because it will be a potential challenge.
Okay, thank you. I know it's early and it's a month out, so it's not fully developed, but I think it's something that's important that we focus on. And I kind of like the suggestion that Director Starks was saying that, maybe we have shorter days or something. I know usually during the typical school year, our schedules are ran by the buses because we have 3-tier buses. Well, we're just doing 1-tier right now. So do we have to have the kids there all day, or can we have them come and have a half hour shorter so those teachers are getting that collaboration time with the DL teachers and their prep times and stuff like that? It's just something to be mindful of. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I'm going by the turns of who I see raising hands. So don't worry, I see you all. I can see all of your hands. I'm going with Director Starks.
So my question is about the family being able to give preferences again, right? Because we're going to be asking distance learning versus in-person this time. Can you talk about any changes for the student should they change models? Would there be any students that would have to switch teachers? Is there students that would have to change schools? What would maybe some consequences be of the parent choices that they may not be aware of at this point?
Dr. Mitchell, was that just, I'll let you handle that one, please.
Yeah, I can get us started, and then Rick Kaufman and the community relations team is sending out that survey. So if there's any follow-ups, Rick, feel free to jump in. So, you know, in the past, when we sent out the family preference form survey, we were able to gather that data, divide students so that they were working either with their distance learning teacher or their hybrid teacher. We're anticipating that families who maybe in the past had made the decision to be in distance learning would make a similar decision again, maybe for similar reasons that they have in the past. We're also hypothesizing that many of the families who've chosen in-person learning in the past will again choose in-person learning. If we have results that are similar and many of the families decide to choose as they have in the past, we won't see as much turnover in terms of teachers and new teachers with new students. However, we recognize people's situations have changed, families' needs have changed. And so if a family or a group of families decides that they want to change their preference, we could see some change in who's teaching which students. The other interesting piece about this is that, and I want to make this clear because I think it was a little unclear perhaps the last time we sent out the parent preference form, is that if you choose in-person learning, there's no guarantee that you will stay with your current teacher. Just as if you chose distance learning, there's no guarantee there either. Like I said, we're hypothesizing that folks will choose similarly to what they have in the past, and we're hoping there won't be a lot of turnover, but it is possible that there could be some changes in who's working with which students and which teachers. Is there anything, Rick, you would add about that?
Just to reiterate, so tomorrow we will send out the learning model choice form to all elementary parents. We'll ask that they complete that by December 30th, so staff can begin and or finalize their staffing and scheduling. This is really, really important that we get that information for every school site and also early learning sites, because we will do a learning model choice form for early learning families as well.
Clarification, Rick, we'll just send that out if the board approves the recommendation tonight.
Correct. Correct, thank you. Yep, all predicated on the board's action this evening, correct.
From a principal standpoint, it's like you just said, Rick, it's very important that we get the results because that's how we plan. Currently, we have, or when we started the year, when we were in hybrid, we had so many hybrid teachers, and then about per grade level, there was a distance learning teacher. Sometimes there were a distance learning teacher that would cover 2 grades. If that model changes, if people want to switch, we have to figure out how we adjust that. So if people switch, there's a good chance that they will have a different teacher. But we also know that we have to offer and make sure that we have a good setup for people so that they feel good sending their child to school. But want to make sure that people understand that that's what we're talking about over the break is we're going to take that data that comes in as it comes in, and we're going to start planning and say, okay, looks like we're getting a little heavy here. We might have to make an adjustment. So it's based on what the data tells us on that choice form.
Director Starks, do you have a follow-up on that?
I do. So it's when the students were going from distance learning to hybrid back in October, that was when a potential teacher shift could have happened. But then due to staffing issues and our rising case numbers, when we flipped back from hybrid to distance, they did not change teachers, correct? Okay. So if they change teachers again in January and we have staffing issues and we revert back to distance, do they stay with that teacher? I'm trying to get a feel for how many transitions we're going to be expecting these elementary schoolers to handle going forward.
Yeah, so, again, I can't give any guarantees about teachers staying the same for students, but I will say that we anticipate folks to make similar choices to what they have in the past in terms of distance learning or in person, and that will allow us then to keep more students with their current teachers. If we have a large number of families who are choosing something different, we may see more turnover.
Dr. Mitchler, if I can add something to maybe provide some clarity as well. This is Jeremy Coons, principal at Indian Mounds. Thank you for having me here this evening. A movement to distance learning doesn't permit for any choice. So therefore, all students will then be in distance learning. Therefore, there's fewer movements or changes that a student might see within their schedule and their teachers. But when it is a movement from a single model to a choice of either distance learning or in person in this situation as being proposed, every decision has a ramification. As Dr. Mitchler had indicated, if things continue to be the exact same, we would be able to move seamlessly into in person. However, that probably is not going to be the case. As Dr. Mitchler had indicated, we hypothesize it will be similar, but every decision will have a change. And so if there is a significant change of students going to in person, the level of change and impact on students might increase. Or inversely, if there is a significant change going to distance learning, there would be a little bit more of impact on the schedules. And we have to wait to see what that data looks like before we can really provide the impact.
Thank you. Director Steiger.
Thank you. My question goes back, and maybe for principals mostly, there's been a lot of questions regarding like specialists, prep time, et cetera, staffing questions, and we know the plan is unfolding yet. So where can they get the information? Where do we direct people to? Because obviously this is going to unfold, and maybe you can talk about how it's going to be communicated to them in the next days as plans unfold. I assume they would come to principals or their building leadership team. Are there other places like will the preparedness plan and the return to learn plan also be updated? And there's places there for not only staff but families to also get information. Can you, because clearly we're not going to know everything tonight. So how will this unfold and how is it going to be communicated?
Dr. Steighoff, I'll take this one from a communication standpoint. We have some guidance with the updated Safe Learning Plan. There was additional guidance provided today. We fully expect that the state will provide additional clarification on questions that we and other school districts are asking about some of the questions you've all posed this evening. Our plan is to, once we receive that clarification, we will update not only the preparedness plan for employees, but the return to learn guide for parents. That's likely going to occur, obviously, after the first of the school year, after the first of the year, once we complete all of our planning with respect to those changes, clarifications, and updates. So again, I think the most important thing here is that our responsibility is to follow the guidelines and comply with any of those changes. And we're all very confident that our team of leaders and principals will be able to do that, and we can communicate in a timely fashion to parents.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bibi, your turn.
Having been a bus rider through all my grades, I know that the space in between the students and the bus driver is very tight. And I'm wondering if we're planning on having our drivers exit the bus and distance so that students can board the bus. Or are we going to have some type of plexiglass barriers made to protect the drivers and the students with that 6-foot distance? What are we anticipating doing?
Superintendent, your microphone.
Ron, are you on? Can you respond, please? Apparently he's not here, so I'll take that question. My understanding, I was on a conference call again.
I'm here. Sorry, Les, I am here.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll look at the possible things. We've already come up with a lot of things and barriers for the drivers between the students. We would look at a lot of things, and Tim and his team of planning of when we have students in the bus, we would have that first student wouldn't start until they're 6 feet behind the driver's seat. So we'll look into all those type of things. But we also have to be aware of anything we put in the bus, we have to get the approval of the state patrol.
Ugh. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Rod.
Director Olson.
Okay, I have a couple of questions that are not related, but they're simple yes/no questions. So I'm hoping to get them rattled off. We talked about, Governor Walz asking that students be serviced in their own classrooms. So I'm assuming though that for EL and special education, they will still be picked up. I'm not sure how they could be serviced, or will they be serviced in the classroom? Maybe they will be serviced in the classroom. And then the other question I have is if the distance learning teachers will still have Wednesdays as their prep time. So I'm sorry, I snuck in 2 questions.
Chair Corman, I can take the first question from Director Olson. As Dr. Christensen talked about earlier, we'll be working both special education, EL, interventionists. We were in a very early call this morning with the MDE where they referenced that the spirit of that part of the order, if students need their educational needs to be met and they need to be pulled from different classrooms by a specialist, and I use that specialist to mean a special education teacher, EL, or the like, counselor, social worker, then that would be fine. And so, although in the EL world, we haven't necessarily decided on the model, as I alluded to earlier, we know that student needs are really, really important, and we'll work like you've been hearing tonight based on who's coming back, who's deciding to stay home, all those factors, but we will continue to work to make sure that that gets accomplished.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Jennifer, you have anything to add, please?
Thank you, Mr. Fujitaki. For special education, all that I would add is that we will work with all of our buildings and then our specific classrooms. As you know, within special education, we have some students who receive a little bit of special education all the way to students who receive a majority of their day within special education. And for those students, we will work very closely with our general education partners in identifying how to really keep our students with the same cohorts of students as they receive special education services, notifying our staff within those buildings so that if we need to do any level of contact tracing, we can most certainly do that to reduce the number of students that we are combining together to make like need groups. So our teams will work really closely together, as Dr. Christensen had talked about earlier, within our special education for special education services.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Starks.
I'm going to ask this question of Dr. Kelly, although you may or may not be able to answer, so my apologies in advance. Do you know where we are in terms of timelines for teachers in the vaccination schedule?
So Director Starks, ACIP, it's the Advisory Council on Immunization Practices, voted on Sunday to modify or to clarify who's in 1B, this next phase of prioritization for vaccination. Teachers, support staff at the district level are in 1B. The thing that I don't know at this point is the state of Minnesota has an allocation advisory group at the state health department. They will put out a recommendation of how to prioritize. It's 49 million people that are in phase 1B when you think about it at the country level. They're going to prioritize the strategies for reaching those populations here in Minnesota for those of us like local public health and our healthcare partners that are going to be vaccinating. So once that comes out, we'll have a better idea of where teachers and support staff fit into that process and a timeline. But it's still going to be a little bit down the road. We're just starting. There's 3 components to phase 1, and the first part of that is just starting, and local public health hasn't even gotten vaccine to start our part of phase 1A. So it'll be a little bit, but it's coming.
Thank you.
Director Steiger.
Thank you. Kind of along that same note, until we do have available vaccines for all staff, could someone, I know that we were given this information, but just maybe someone could quickly review, what is the process for a staff person that believes they qualify for an accommodation under the American Disabilities Act because of a health issue? And could someone please talk about that so people that maybe have significant health issues, what the process is and what they can do?
Mary, can you please handle that question?
Yeah, so the process would be the same as we did at the beginning of the year. So most people probably have already gone through that process because we have talked about going in person multiple times, this past school year as we transition and change and things happen. They reach out to HR. We send, if it's for their own health risk, there's a specific form that they have to have their doctor fill out. If it's for a family member, we ask for medical documentation. We keep a list of everyone who has requested accommodation. So the process isn't any different than what we've gone through. And I think we probably have heard from, a lot of staff already because we've faced this decision multiple times this school year. So.
Thank you. The reason I asked is we're getting some letters to that topic, so I just wanted to make sure that you addressed it again.
Yeah, one thing I want to emphasize is we don't need to redo the process. So if people have already notified HR, they do not have to notify us again. We have it on record. We don't need to redo everything that we've already done.
Director Olson.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I had cheated last time, so I'm going to go back to my question. If the distance learning teachers are still having prep time on Wednesdays, and Director Storm had brought up something that was, possibly an option, I thought, was that the classroom teachers would have Wednesdays for prep time. Is that out of the question?
Director Olson, I can take that question. So right now we're proposing the 5-day-a-week model for in-person learning, and we're proposing that the distance learning model remain the same, and also that the Bloomington online school model remain the same.
Director Starks.
So I have a question about the calendar, and I'm trying to find here it is. So, in section 2 of the resolution, it talks about moving the PD day from the 19th to the 13th and then adding the additional 2 days for planning. if I recall from my days on the calendar committee, the 19th of January is specifically for elementary teachers to write their report cards. So is that expectation still on the table for the elementary teachers, or is that being removed since this is now being moved, the date's being moved in order to accommodate changing models? And if not, how are we going to give the teachers enough time to make this significant change in addition to asking them to do report cards?
Director Starks, I'm glad you asked that question. I was hoping for an opportunity to explain that a little bit better because I know I kind of just briefly mentioned it in the slides. So yeah, what we're proposing here is a change so that the professional development day that was originally scheduled for the 19th be shifted to the 13th, which is a Wednesday, only for the elementary staff who are not teaching at Bloomington Online School. And then we would have 2 additional days of preparation on the 14th and on the 15th for those staff to prepare for the shift. That would mean we could implement the shift to traditional learning starting on the 19th. Now, just as you said there, that's the end of the I guess you might say like first half of the school year. And so we know that staff are doing a lot of their assessments right around that time. They would have used part of the day on the 19th for grading. It would have been half of the day had been allocated for grading. We're planning to free up more of that professional development day on the 13th so that they have more than a half of the day to do that grading and finishing up the work for the end of the semester. And then they would still have those 2 days of prep the following 2 days, the 14th and 15th. So what you're outlining is correct, that there will be a few fewer days in that first half of the year. And so likely we'll need to be finishing up with the first half of the year a little bit sooner, but that is so that we can get that grading done and then make the shift to traditional starting right away on the 19th.
Go ahead.
Can I follow up? So my concern is not shortening the first half of the year. My concern is the capacity of an elementary school teacher to be doing their end of the semester report cards in addition to preparing for a new learning model that they've never done before. So I'm quite concerned about that workload on the teachers in a 3-day time period. So I'm not concerned about the lack of, it's almost arbitrary in the elementary world anyway, and where those breaks land. But that's my concern about that shift. It also, it gives students 7 days after the beginning of, or after they come back from winter break, to then have 3 days off, to then have a holiday, to then start in traditional. It just seems very broken up the way that it was proposed. So just sharing my concerns.
Director Starks?
I do have more questions, but I'd like to pivot if that's okay. Can I
Yes.
pivot to athletics and activities?
Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So
Hold on. 1 second, Director Starks. Superintendent, were you going to say something?
No, we're ready for the question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So for Mr. Nyberg and Mr. Anderson, I just want to clarify, I've got one clarification question, then a follow-up question. So the way that the executive order is written right now, if we were to align ourselves with that, our athletics and activities can begin practices on the 4th, but competitions are still unknown. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then have you had any conversations with other, because I'm gonna come back to the thing I keep saying every meeting, is that I wish that this was a district or a conference decision, or bigger than just district by district. Have you had any conversations with other districts within our conference about whether or not they're going to be aligning their school districts to this new order?
Yeah, everyone within the Metro West Conference is planning on participating, and well, frankly, every school I've talked to that's not part of our conference but is a neighboring or a couple suburbs away, no one has said they're not doing anything at this point. Everyone is going to start on the 4th that I've talked to.
Okay, thank you.
Director Bennett.
So in line with the sports here, when we passed our resolution, under our current resolution, we said that sports teams could form and meet virtually. And then the governor, when he put his pause in, said that teams couldn't even form. So now that that executive order has gone away, are we allowing our sports teams like hockey to be able to register and form and practice virtually, or are we not doing that yet?
We would start on January 4th, depending on what you guys vote on tonight. So either virtual, if you say we can't come back, in person, because we've always gone off of what the prescribed season is or start date. And now we know that the prescribed start date is Jan 4. So it'd either be virtual or in person, dependent on what happens here tonight.
Okay, so they couldn't meet before then virtually. They have to wait until January 4th. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, the way we have done it, yes. Because we didn't have a season, in our opinion. We didn't know when our start date was. So we only do things once we know what a season begins and ends. So we didn't have that information, of when the pause would be over.
Okay, thank you.
Director Olson.
Okay, so obviously if we're not doing hybrid and we're going back to 5 days a week, our class sizes could easily increase greatly. So I'm just really hoping that people listening are taking that into consideration. And if they are able to do distance learning, if their children prefer consistency, because we have no way of knowing, or do better with consistency, we have no way of knowing if we could end up going back, pivoting back to in-person or distance learning again. I just want to encourage people that if it works for your child, to do distance learning. And I especially have concerns about children in obviously we can't prioritize students who have the most need to come in person. But I also have concerns about early childhood, because with those students, there are, helping them with bathrooms. Sometimes they have accidents. There's wiping their noses. There's holding hands. There's, a lot of singing, teaching them to share, teaching them to play with each other. This is the age category that I have the most concerns about doing safely. So is it my understanding that we are saying that these children are not spreading the virus, that we're not seeing them spread? Because I thought that we had many classes quarantined at the early childhood level.
Anna, could you handle that, please?
Yes, thank you for that question, Director Olson. So what we are seeing is that children who are under the age of 10, we significantly see that spread decrease. We're not saying it could never happen at all, but we do see a significant decrease in any students under the age of 10. Now, you referred to quarantine. We do not change the guidelines or quarantine based on the age of the student. So you're correct in that if a preschool or early childhood student tested positive, we still would follow our same quarantine guidelines and err on the side of caution and quarantine those who have been in close contact with the child, if that makes sense. So that's why you still, this fall, when we were back in session, or winter, you still saw a lot of quarantines taking place in that early childhood level, because we still followed those same guidelines and asked that teachers and other students do quarantine and watch for symptoms if there was a positive case and they were in close contact. The decision to move back to the traditional model for early childhood and elementary is based on the evidence and research that that age group, we're seeing a lot less spread in those who are under the age of 10.
Okay, thank you.
Director Starks?
Well, I'd like to pivot now to secondary. So should I wait and see if anyone's got questions about athletics and activities or elementary before I move on?
Anybody else? Director Bibi.
when we say that we are allowing youth organized sports in Bloomington to practice and then to play each other, is that our own school teams mixing with other schools, like maybe our two high schools are playing games and competing with each other in order to have practices? Or is it, some of these other hockey teams that are not part of our schools, but are still youth sports organizations? Will they be competing against each other? Is that kind of the picture that we should expect?
I mean, so in a school setting, we're only responsible for high school things, not youth programs. His order was all encompassing over all youth sports, which encompasses high school as well as youth. But yes, he's really saying the same thing to everybody, is that Jan 4, you guys can start practicing, right? But no timetable has been set for competitions at this point. But he's saying that to all groups. So there is no intermixing or competition at this point. That's what you're asking. But we don't have any oversight over the youth programs within Jefferson's attendance or Kennedy's attendance, or things of that nature. It's just our programming that we're responsible for.
And I can add to that too. Part of our reopening plan, we did talk about when they do start to allow competitions. And with the population we serve, it'd be Bloomington Athletic Association youth sports teams within Bloomington competing against each other. So it'd be kind of like an in-house league to start with, instead of bringing in teams and schools from other communities.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Steiger. Director Steiger, before you go, just a reminder for everyone to turn your microphones off. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, can we go back to the conversation about the quarantining, early childhood, other quarantining? If Ms. Hatch would maybe talk about the difference between people are quarantining, my understanding is because of spread in the community, not because of spread at school, or people I know that are essential workers and other families I know with kids in school 5 days a week. The spread is not happening at school, it is in the community. So could you talk about, our cases of quarantining? Were they also from community exposure, that type of thing? Thank you.
Sure, you bet. So as you know, we do extensive contact tracing with all cases that were positive within our school district that we find out. We do interviews to figure out where they could have contracted COVID-19, and then trace back who they've been in contact with, where they've been, everything like that. It is important to kind of differentiate when someone is positive for COVID or has symptoms, that places them in isolation. So they're in this 10-day isolation. I can tell you that when we did the tracking, and according to Bloomington Public Health data, by and large, the cases are coming from community spread. So we saw a lot of spread within family systems, or sporting events, or going out to social events, things like that. And then some of it is people just have no idea where they contracted it. They didn't know that they were in close contact with someone, and that is also considered community spread. If someone is placed on a quarantine, it means that they were within close contact of someone who tested positive. So in our schools, even though they may not be contracting it there, or we're not seeing a lot of evidence of spread there, we still continue to follow MDH's guidelines for quarantine. So again, if there was a positive case within the classroom, we would quarantine anyone who had been in close contact with that positive case. And so we will continue to follow those quarantine guidelines. With this new model, the major change that you're going to see is that prior to when we were in hybrid previously, we worked really hard for students to all stay 6 feet apart, and that's the social distance. So what makes someone a close contact would be if they were within 6 feet of someone for a cumulative of 15 minutes or more. That means you're a close contact and you need to quarantine. The big difference with this model is that the students will no longer be required to maintain that 6 feet. We will still do our best to encourage distancing and safe distancing. However, it's no longer a requirement of the students. So when there's a positive case in a classroom, as you can imagine, pretty much the whole class will most likely need to quarantine just because they will have been within close contact of each other. The other point to clarify is if someone's placed in quarantine, because they were a close contact, their family members or siblings would not need to also quarantine. They'd be considered a contact of a contact. And in that case, we don't require quarantine. However, if you're in close contact with someone in isolation, you would quarantine. So again, very complicated, but just a brief overview as to what would place someone in quarantine versus isolation and how that changes in this new model.
Director Steigoff, this is Rick Kaufman. If I could add to that as well. In addition to what we saw in terms of community transmission, for lots of our students, should the board approve the resumption of youth sports and activities on the 4th, one thing that we are asking all student athletes, coaches, families, parents to adhere to is to participate comes with is a great responsibility, and it's critical that all of the participants maintain the highest standards of not only health but safety, both in and outside of school. Everyone has to take a responsibility of reducing the spread of COVID-19 by making sure that themselves and others are safe and healthy. Last fall, all of our sports teams that were shut down were due to transmissions that did not occur in practices or competitions, but or in competitions with other teams. But all were attributed to gatherings of players and families before and after practices and competitions or during weekends and evenings. And so I know the two activities directors, John and Chad, we've talked about this, and in additional communication, should again the board allow the resumption of activities, they will be communicating that with their student athletes, coaches, and parents tomorrow as well.
Thank you. So I guess we could say that if people want to be able to participate in sports and schools to stay open, then you need to start following the guidelines around community spread and not be hanging out at each other's houses, not carpooling together to practice, et cetera, et cetera. Would that summarize it? Thank you.
Thank you, Director Steiger. Director Bennett.
Yeah, so I had a question for Dr. Kelly. And first of all, thank you, Dr. Kelly, again for being with us tonight. You've been an invaluable asset to our district, so thanks for being here. You spoke earlier about the Return to Learn plan and that it made sense and that for us to go ahead and do that. I wonder if you could kind of share your thoughts with regards to the governor's plan for sports and what your thoughts are around that.
Thanks, Director Bennett. The governor's plan for sports, I think it's reasonable right now to have the approach of not having that games or other things going on. Athletics do play a positive role, and they do also contribute in part due to the social and other components to spread at the community level. And so I think right now the guidance of you can practice, but we're not going to have any of the games, the tournaments, and those things are paused until we continue to see changes. And our case rates is a reasonable approach.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, before I go with Director Starks, any other questions in relation to this one, athletics and activities? No? Director Starks, go ahead.
Okay, so I have two different questions about secondary. So I'll start the first one. So in the resolution, it says resume targeted services when middle schools shift to a less restrictive learning model. It was my understanding that targeted services had already begun, even though middle school and high school has never been in a less restrictive model. So do I have that incorrect?
Target services, we're planning to start, we didn't start.
Okay, so there's never been a middle school
No.
or high school targeted service. Okay, so I guess then it follows into my next question. My concern is with middle school and high school, and as a middle school and high school parent, I feel like middle school and high school changes feel so far away. Like just the options for my kids and any middle school and high school kid to get back in person just feels astronomical right now. And can we have any conversations about those kids and those age groups in terms of like targeted services or setting goal dates for, we'd really like to have our high schoolers back in some form, you know, 1 day a week, whatever, beginning third trimester. Can we set some goals? Can we have some conversations about anything just so that the middle school and high school returning to a different model doesn't feel so unattainable? Is that a conversation where we can have?
Director Starks, there is conversation going on at the state level about looking at the case rate information. Right now it's at 50, and they've talked about lowering that, and they continue to have conversations about that. They talk about the scalpel approach. There is conversation going on. I'd wait for the state to give guidance on this thing. I think they're on the verge of doing something. If the case rates continue to go down, they're going to do something. The pressure's on them to do this, and we'll continue to talk to the state. I'd leave it at that right now.
Okay, so I'm just going to respectfully ask that whoever has the ear of the state continues this conversation with them so that we can move the needle forward a little bit for our middle school and our high school students.
I'll give you my assurance. I'm going to do that.
Thank you.
Director Olson.
Okay, so I heard from a teacher in Minneapolis, you know, who they are doing successfully doing distance learning in all of Minneapolis and this entire school year. They are having morning meetings with all ages, including middle school and high school. They're having morning check-in meetings where they can kind of help with talking about their feelings and maybe checking in with a social worker. And I'm wondering if that's an option for our students for mental health purposes and a connection with other students.
Who wants to take that one? Dr. Mitchell?
Yeah, thanks, Director Olson. So we are doing morning meetings at the elementary level. And with regard to supporting students at the secondary level, I do know that we're going to be continuing to put a focus in that area and even more of a focus as we continue to develop more resources for students and staff. So a piece of that, and you'll notice I didn't share a whole lot about this during the slides that I shared earlier because there isn't a lot of new guidance that's come from the state. But I will say just a little bit about the planning that's happening there is we're planning to do some assessments with students in grades 2 and up through to grade 12 to get a better understanding of what students' needs are with regard to social emotional learning, mental health, and then make sure that we have the supports in place. And so that may include having some virtual sessions with staff, maybe regularly, sort of as it sounds like you might be suggesting. But that's all yet to be determined, and we're looking forward to continuing to build that out, finding ways to assess where students are at, and then build out those tiers of support or strengthen where we have tiers of support already in place. Thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you.
So Chair Corman had to step away for a minute. So does anyone else have any more questions? Yes, Director Beebe.
My concern of hearing that there haven't been targeted services maybe speaks to some of the emails we've gotten from families where they have students that are really struggling. And I don't think that that's a minority group. I think there's a lot that are struggling. And I'm a little concerned that we don't bring more kids in for more mental health needs. Maybe there are, and I'm not aware of it. But I think that's about as critical as the academics at times right now. When we hear from parents that are just saying, hey, you know, I'm at my end. They themselves are struggling so hard. Our community just seems to be really fragile. And I know it's hard even with our teachers and all the adjustments that they've made, that it's hard on them to think of another change. But I know there are great people in this district that are doing their very best. But I don't know if we can have somebody address more of what's being done with mental health. We talk about social emotional learning, but some of those kids, they need more one-on-ones, or they need support groups. What's being done for them?
Excuse me, Director Beebe, any clarification? Targeted Services is a funding program for after-school, extended day, or extended year programming. In other words, summer school or after-school programming. I'd like to call upon Jennifer McIntyre to talk about the services her group provides.
Yes, thank you, Superintendent Fujitaki. I'm glad that you called on me, and I'm also glad, Beth, that you were asking, Dr. Beebe, that you're asking this question specifically about what we are doing for students now. As many of you know, we have a really well-suited group of social workers, school counselors, and also mental health providers throughout our district who are continually working with students. Some of them are doing one-on-one virtually, and some have actually worked out how they can do one-on-one face-to-face with students. It has been a targeted area for us all the way from early childhood through our secondary programs. I know our social workers, school counselors, our school psychologists, all of them have really prioritized the mental health supports that we can provide for our students, and then also, quite frankly, our staff, to make sure that we have folks in place that can really assist when needed. It is a focus. It's something that we've talked about as a larger administrative group with our plans with coming back and looking at what we're doing in January. How do we make this a continual focus so that as students are making this transition, it's a large transition, how do we support them and how do we support the families as they're going through different phases of this transition so we can have as much success as we can. But it's important for us to stay on top of the mental health components. There's a lot more out there than what we probably can manage and handle, but I sure know our staff are very involved with all of those components to stay in touch for mental health supports to make sure that they're there.
Thank you. Director Olson.
Okay, I didn't mean to have my hand raised, but since I do, I had a teacher and a parent both share an article with me that they wanted me to touch on, and I would love to share it. Is this an opportunity to do so shortly?
Director Olson, if it's an article, you can send it via email to all?
I mean, for the public to hear.
Are you gonna read an entire article?
No.
Okay. You're making me nervous now. I just want to continue with the.
I know, because when they said that, I said, I don't think I have the time to do that, but I just want to refer people to an article. How about that?
Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's an article by Superintendent in upstate New York, Diane Revich, and it's called "What Shall We Do About Children After the Pandemic?" And it was really based on so many parents that we're hearing from so many people that are concerned about the deficits that children are experiencing during this pandemic time, and she just wanted to address that. And it's a beautifully written article, but basically what she says is that when children return to school, they will have returned with a new history, and our job is to welcome them back and to help them unite that history and resist the pressure to make up for lost time. For the time was not lost, it was invested in surviving a historic period of time in their lives. So, in other words, children don't need to be fixed, they need to be heard, and we need to nurture their resilience. So the whole article by Diane Rivich is called What Shall We Do About Children After the Pandemic? And I'd love for parents to read that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Olson. Okay, any other questions before we move on to the resolution part? And any of the other items? Okay, I don't see anyone, so let's go. Oh, Director Bennett.
Sorry, just one last question. I know the proposal is for 5 days a week. I think a concern is that moving too quickly. I'm wondering if there was any thought to possibly doing 4 days a week to start, and then, you know, like for the first 2 weeks we're doing K through 2, and the next 2 weeks after that do 3 through 5. Like for that month, just do 4 days a week, just so that we can kind of roll this out a little slower, and then after that maybe move to 5 days a week. Was that possibility explored at all, or could it still be?
Dr. Mishler, could you handle that, please?
Yeah, Director Bennett. So we had interpreted the governor's guidance around in-person learning to be a 5-day-a-week model. And I will say we were looking at 4 days a week versus 5 days a week. We started to look at our neighboring districts and noticed many of them were looking like they were going to also propose a 5-day week. And so recognizing that, you know, the governor had recommended in-person learning, that our traditional learning in the past had been 5 days a week, and recognizing that it seemed many of our neighbors were also going to be moving in the direction of 5 days, we had thought that that might be what would be best to propose at this time.
Okay, well, I don't disagree. That's why I was saying, would it be possible we could kind of slowly roll it out, like start 4 days and then after a month, just so that it's not everything all at once. I don't know if that's even doable or if that just makes things more problematic.
Yeah, I wonder if Superintendent Fujitaki or Rick Kaufman, who have been a part of consulting with some of our health folks, if they have any, or Hannah Hatch, have anything that you want to add about the idea of doing a slower phase in to the grade bands.
No, I think that one of the things we looked at were what were other school districts doing, and so we contacted not only our neighboring districts but a lot of tier 1 circle around the metro area in terms of the back to school. Most, if not all of them, are doing 5 days. It is the traditional model. It's what parents have been asking for, and so our planning has really been. Yes, we looked at a 4-day week model initially, but we moved towards 5 days based on the fact that we could do it. It's what parents want. It's what the guidance is providing by the state. So I would defer to Hannah and Nick if it buys us anything by going 4 days to 5 days, other than more disruption for families. And I think we're trying to reduce that.
I think from a health standpoint, I mean, if they're in class together 4 days a week, having the 1 day off wouldn't necessarily benefit the exposure piece of it. I think maybe what you're referring to would be the benefit for teachers and things like that, which I would not speak to necessarily. But the from a health perspective, I don't think the exposure would be greatly decreased by not having them there just 1 day a week.
Yeah, I was thinking more from a teacher workload standpoint, not necessarily the health standpoint. It's just, it's going to be a lot going from all distance to all in person. And I just thought that it might be beneficial to kind of roll that out a little slower is kind of what the point I was trying to make.
Thank you. Director Starks?
Well, so can I follow up on that 4 day a week option too? Because I think I heard this correctly, but I want to make sure I got this right. So it would be the teachers in person would be doing 5 days a week with student contact, whereas the teachers, the elementary teachers, not the Bloomington online school, they're their own group. The distance learning elementary teachers, they would still have the Wednesday flex day as it currently stands. Is that correct? Or did I hear that wrong?
Yeah, Director Stark. So we are proposing what the state's guidance is to come back traditional starting the week of January 18th. And the state also provides guidance around teachers who are working with students who are distance learning or hybrid, needing additional and receiving additional prep time. And so we don't plan, again, to shift the model that we have in place for distance learning or for our Bloomington online schools. So we are making a recommendation that's in alignment with the guidance right now.
Okay, so I guess my concern, I don't know, Mr. Bennett, if this was where you were going with that or not, but I do know that the elementary teachers that were teaching hybrid and that were teaching distance were connecting with each other on Wednesdays because they want to align and make sure that their curriculum is the same. Sometimes the distance learning teacher has something that they share with the hybrid teacher and vice versa. And so by having one set of teachers with student contact on that day and another set of teachers not, we've completely lost that connection for those teachers to work together. So I think that's a concern of mine too, is that that collaboration that was built in the hybrid model being lost in the traditional model is, I think, a huge loss for our teaching staff and for the students, for the loss of what they may see there too. I have a follow-up, or I have another question, but I'll wait if there's other folks.
Were any of the principals going to address this specific? You don't have to. Just, I don't know when it comes with teacher collaboration, if there's, you know, depending on the school, there's always like specific times of the day regarding of which day it is that it's outside of the classroom hours, of the student contact hours, that would allow for that regardless of them being in the distance learning versus the in person every day. Directors, go ahead.
We do have staff meetings where we can pull everyone together and work together on making sure that we're all on the same page. So, and we kind of hear, if we look and we see that there's needing more time, that's something we would look at, and we would try to make adjustments accordingly and say, okay, let's not have a staff meeting this week, and this needs to be time for them to collaborate. So there's ways to try to make that work as well. It's just a matter of what the needs are and what people are wanting.
Thank you. Director Steiger.
I think Mr. Meyer took care of my question. Thank you.
Director Starks, did you have another question?
Well, kind of, because since Director Bennett brought up a change in model, I thought I'd ask this question too. So, you know, the resolution's written to begin on January 19th, or the week of January 18th, I guess is how it's written. Is there any room for pushing that date backwards? In sense that I'm hearing a lot of we don't have that information. MDE is updating us. We're looking to find out more about transportation. It just feels like there's quite a few loose ends right now that are not solidified. It won't be solidified for a while. The only analogy I can think of right now is that we're being asked to break ground for a house that doesn't have blueprints yet. And so can we push back the start date of this implementation date so that we know we have the blueprints ready before we start the transition process?
So my response to that is that's a governance call. If the board wants to choose, if that's what they want, we will make that happen as far as delaying the start. That's up to them. We develop those target dates of the week of the 18th, 5 days a week based upon surveys, as Rick talked about, of other districts, what they're doing. And the majority of districts are doing 5 days a week and starting on the week of the 18th. So it's a governance call, up to the board.
I might just add one additional piece is, you know, when we were looking at the dashboard, it showed that 3 areas, 3 of the indicators were yellow, as in there's a potential challenge here that we need to overcome. Those areas were around staffing, which I think will continue to be a concern at whatever point that we decide to shift. It really will continue to be a challenge for us. One of the other areas was around, and I should also mention around reserve teachers, which is a piece of the staffing. Another area was around the physical health and safety. Some of that is we're waiting for more of the PPE that the state is going to be providing us, but they're telling us that we're on a timeline to receive that before the week of the 18th. And we know other districts are going to be looking for the same timeline to be carried out. And then the third area that was in yellow was the supporting all learners. And the reason there was because we hadn't gathered yet the parent preferences. And so that is something that we'll be doing as Executive Director Kaufman said, starting, I believe, tomorrow, getting that form out and collecting that data before the 30th. So just in summary, going back to that dashboard, the areas that were in yellow, we anticipate will be either ready to go by the 18th or will continue to be ongoing challenges at whatever point we decide to shift.
Chair Corman, if I may, just in response to Director Stark's question, I think she brings up a really good point in that I think the other piece that's compounds this, Director Starks, is the timing. We're just heading into a winter break, and so our desire to let our families and our teachers and our community know what's happening in lieu of coming back in January the 4th and trying to rush this through. And so I think you're right that we're caught in between of knowing what the order is, trying to respond to, as the superintendent talked about, the surveys and the data that we have out there, but at the same time knowing that there are many loose ends that we know will get solved, but it's disconcerting when they're not completely solved at this point. But the timing it couldn't be worse.
Yeah, Director Starks again.
Well, and I know it's a chicken and egg problem that we've had the entire time, right? We can't make decisions until we know what parents want, but parents can't make decisions until we tell them what's happening, right? So I recognize that there's this inherent problem that we've had all along. I wrote down, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things still undetermined as far as I could hear that we're going to be asking parents tomorrow to make a decision about. And it just feels like that's maybe not fair or not appropriate at this point. And then the other piece that I come back to is when Ms. Hatch talked at the very, very beginning, they mentioned that they'll be doing the group testing every 2 weeks and that it won't start until the week of the 18th. And it'll catch those asymptomatic folks that, will have a large positivity rate at the beginning because we'll catch them. And so I'm thinking well, let's have a round of that first and catch everyone before we go back in person, instead of going back in person, doing the testing, catching everyone, and then throwing it all into chaos. So that's another reason why I'm suggesting or thinking pushing this out by a week or two, the start date out by a week or two, just to allow some things to fall into place, including the testing.
So if I can share to just provide a little clarification on your last point, Director Starks. So I attended the training for the test administration. Unfortunately, Hannah and I were both scheduled to, and the site filled up and Hannah was not able to get into it. They did provide us with not only information, but the testing is actually intended to start January 4th. Each district is going to be assigned a date. We don't know when that date is. We did pose a question to them that those districts that are starting on the 18th didn't make a whole lot of sense to start testing on that week as well. So they expect to provide additional clarification on Wednesday of this week. The other thing is, Ms. Hatch talked about, we have Ridgeview test site that'll be open, 2 days tomorrow, and then next week, 3 days, and then 6 days a week in January. We will encourage staff to take the opportunity to take the saliva test. They get the results back. Even if we are administering the test, we don't know what the test results. That is left up to the staff, and if they're following our guidelines, will let us know. So we agree with you that it would be advantageous to have to know if any asymptomatic staff are positive, but we've been operating sort of that way since the start of the school year, and we respond accordingly. But I just wanted to clarify that because the date has not yet been determined, and it may be that we'll get those tests before the 18th.
Okay, so based on the questions that I'm hearing here in the comments, it seems like maybe, as superintendent had mentioned, this is something that falls within the governance side. Administration has made a recommendation. So if you are all okay with that, I think we should probably move into the resolution and then have the discussion. Because it seems more like everybody's gonna want to follow that and go into discussion. So I know that Director Olson has a hand raised. Is that because you have a question, or is this related to this a specific question, comment, and then we should probably go into that resolution first?
It's related to what Director Starks is saying, and also I want to say that I really appreciate our superintendent and our administration for every decision that we have done so far. We have not had knee-jerk reactions. We have done them slowly and, you know, taken in information, and we don't necessarily do what the surrounding districts are doing. So for the same reasons, we get a lot of pressure to go back to school, open schools right away after break from the community, but you know, because other districts are doing that. But I think that doing things slowly and correctly is, you know, better than doing things quickly and finding out mistakes. So far, we have learned from other districts who have gone ahead of us, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that we take our time in these decisions. So I personally would not mind pushing this out.
Thank you. Director Starks? No? Okay. So how about we go, Director Steiger, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I agree with Chair Carmen that we need to move the resolution, because the things that people are saying now are actually things that would be amendments to the resolution and not really necessarily questions. And so we need to get to the resolution and stop talking about amending it and changing it until we have the resolution on the table. Thank you.
Yeah, and so remember, we can still ask questions once we're there, but we need to be there. Okay, would somebody like to read that resolution? I see two hands up. Director Steiger, did you want to read it?
I didn't take my hand down before, but I can read it, I think. It's hard for me to read it because, you know, I have to read it from my phone. So hopefully I can see it.
Okay, maybe anybody else who's in front of them.
I got it. I'll do it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Be it resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 271 approves and authorizes the administration to accomplish the following. Move elementary grades K-5 and grade level groupings from distance learning to traditional learning 5 days per week, beginning the week of January 18th, 2021. Change the existing professional development day from January 19th, 2021 to January 13th, 2021 for the non-Bloomington online school elementary staff, and provide non-Bloomington online school elementary staff 2 additional preparation days, 1 each on January 14th and January 15th, 2021. Resume early learning services the week of January 18th, 2021. Resume Kids Safari childcare for all families the week of January 18th, 2021. Resume elementary after-school programs the week of January 18th, 2021. Maintain middle school grades 6-8 in distance learning following the same protocol and parameters, case rates in the Safe Learning Plan. Maintain high school grades 9-12 in distance learning following the same protocol and parameters, case rates in the Safe Learning Plan. Resume targeted services when middle schools shift to a less restrictive learning model. Resume high school athletics and activities on January 4th, 2021, as allowed by the governor's orders. Resume public use of facilities using a gradual reopening as allowed by the Safe Learning Plan on January 4th, 2021.
Director
I second.
Thank you. So it was moved by Director Steiger and second by Director Sorum. Okay, now we can open that discussion. No, I don't see anyone with it. Director Steiger is the only one with the hand up still. Director Starks, go ahead.
Well, Director Corman, this is where I was going to ask the question I asked you earlier today. Should I start now or should I wait for other folks to discuss?
You can bring it to the board and then we'll see what the board thinks.
So here's my concern about the way the resolution is written. There's two very distinct things within the resolution. There's the whether we reopen elementary, pre-K, all that jazz that's tied to the Safe Learning Plan by MDE. And then there's the athletics and activities and public use of facilities, which is tied to the Executive Order 20-103. So I was going to ask my fellow board members, before I do a formal amendment, whether or not they see the value in separating the resolution into two.
Director Bibi?
I don't think it's necessary because it's all part of one executive order that was given by the governor. And so if it was something separate, coming from separate offices, but I think the integrity of the document is that it relates to the executive order, and we're voting to implement that within our district.
Director Sorum?
I agree. I support the resolution as adopted. We've been talking about this for a long time, and I think it's time that now that we have an executive order and we have MDE, MDH, governor, and our whole staff who has, I shouldn't say all of the staff, but our leadership teams doing all of these things that we want to get started in January 4th. And if it takes us a little bit longer, past January 19th or whatever it is, so be it. That can all be handled operationally.
Thank you. Director Steiger?
Yes, I'm just going to say that I would prefer that we do not discuss amendments before there's an amendment. If we're not going to discuss whether we're going to do an amendment, either make the motion for the amendments, people, or don't discuss it, because if we're gonna, I don't want to keep taking polls on whether we're going to amend it or not, I guess I could say. Either make the amendments that you want and they can be voted on and we can discuss them then, but we should not be discussing a possible amendment before there's a motion made for an amendment. Does that make it clear? Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes, my apologies. I did talk to both the chair and the lawyer today to make sure I was doing this correctly. So my apologies if I misunderstood the conversations I had earlier today. I've thrown this into chaos too many times in my first year of board governing. I did not want to do that again. So my apologies to all my fellow board members and the community watching if that's what I did. So I'll defer to the chair to let me know if there's any thing I can do further. Thank you.
It's okay, Director Starks. It's a valid concern, so thank you for sharing.
I'm just saying we've gone down this road many times, not just one director, many of us. So I'm just trying to keep us back on where we're supposed to be.
That's a goal for all of us.
Guilty.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm also going with moving forward with the current resolution that we have. I think that's pretty clear that but you know, we still have Director Bennett and Director Olson. I don't want to take that word away from you since everybody else had that opportunity. But I also don't need to go into lengthy conversations if we're just moving forward with this resolution.
Yes.
Okay, looks like. Okay, so let's focus on the resolution then itself. Any other discussion regarding the current resolution? Before we vote? No? Director Starks?
All right, well then I'm just going to jump in the deep end and do an amendment.
Okay.
So I motion to amend the dates for the first 5 sections to read the week of February 1st, 2021.
No.
I second Director Olson.
Okay, so we have there an amendment made by, proposed amendment made by Director Starks and second by Director Olson. Discussion. Director Beebe?
I am definitely wanting us to get moving on this. The parents have been asking for us to get the kids back in the school. They're asking for normalcy. They're wanting there to be consistency. And some even think, you know, we should have been able to have gotten this done sooner. And others are lamenting the fact that maybe it will go into February. I think we have a community out there that's asking us to get the kids back in school. We've now been given the opportunity, as Governor Walz has changed the directives and the standards that we have to hold on to. And so now these families are really wanting us to get them back in. I understand that we have teachers who are exhausted from all the changes. I also think that they are capable, once they've had a break, remember there's going to be a winter break for 2 weeks, and they should be able to regain some energy during that time, I hope. And therefore, when they come back, that they can be able to prepare to be in traditional learning. I think it's a disservice to keep prolonging this. I think the emails will be coming to us left and right about how we need to get the kids back in school. So I am totally against amending this and changing the dates.
Director Bennett?
Yes, well, I think the good thing of meeting on December 21st and making this decision is that nothing is starting until January 19th. So this is already giving administration a month to get these plans into action. And I would assume that if there are any red flags that pop up along the way, that we could always revisit this and reverse course and delay the implementation. So I'm not really in support of delaying it that long. I might be more in line to support if the resolution were to allow for early childhood to start on the 19th and maybe start K2 the following week. But I really don't want to pause everything until February. That's my take anyway.
Director Steiger?
I would agree with Director Bennett that we have time by doing it now, and that the district can come back to us if there's issues that they cannot work out by then, and as the plan unrolls. And that's why I was asking, where do people get their information about the plan and the future and the communication, because clearly there's going to be changes made along the way. I would not look to delay it, but people have to understand that this is just what is for today. And I know people don't like uncertainty, but this is what happens in a pandemic. The guidelines change, the science changes, the numbers changes. Staffing can be an issue or not an issue. We won't know until we see the parents that are going to send their kids back or their kids in distance. And so I don't want to delay anything today. It doesn't mean that before we get to that date that we won't be back here delaying it, because administration has come to us once again and said, you know, we still can't staff something, or we still can't do whatever, or the governor could change some new guidelines by then. We have no idea what will happen. We cannot plan for what happens a month from now as much as we would like to.
Director Olson?
These are all very valid points. I would just like to ask that the community give the teachers and all of the staff who work so hard to make this happen, which includes, you know, the secretaries. Every time we pivot to a different type of learning, There is a lot of work involved, secretaries and the paras and all the staff involved in helping to make this happen. And I wish I could list them all, but I can't because there are so many people. And just have the patience and grace and respect for the teachers that they deserve, because we don't need them to burn out. The teachers, you know, I think of it, I even said this when I was running for school board, that, you know, we put students first, yes, but just like on a plane when, you know, we ask adults to put their oxygen mask on first before the kids, we need to take care of the teachers in order for them to take care of the kids. And we have put them through the ringer. We have really put them through the ringer. And it's not, I mean, it's not our superintendent or administration's fault. It's the fault of the pandemic, and everybody is working very, very hard. We all know that we need our teachers, and I do trust that we're going to do the best that we can by them. But I would like the community to be on board with that too.
Director Sorum.
Right, thank you. I don't support the amendment, and parliamentary wise, I call the question, which means we have to take a vote now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And so we've been given a recommendation by the administration. I'm going to go with that recommendation as with the proposed recommendation of the dates. As I am choosing to trust, your good common sense and your direction, that you believe that this is something that we can do. And at the same time, I worry about the teachers. Of course, I'm a teacher myself, so I can see myself being put in that situation. But at the same time, I would reiterate that I would ask people to, once again, as you get together and develop the plans, that you consider all those different needs as we start. The importance of giving that for the teachers to really having that space and the reassurance that things are being put in place so that we can have a start on that day of the week of the 18th. The families are desperate. We can see it in the emails. This is hard for everyone. It really is hard. COVID is not friendly at all. We all hate it because it really is totally, unpredictable. And like Director Steigaff said, we are now making a decision, and anything can change just depending on how those numbers go, how the spread goes. If we don't have enough staff in our schools, it makes it impossible to really have the kids do. So there's different things to look at, but at least we're giving our families and our kids that opportunity to return to the classroom. And as the date that has been recommended by the governor in his order, then I will remain with that date as well. It is a recommendation of the administration too. Okay, so let's vote on that amendment. So all those in favor of amendment this resolution, this amendment to the, approving the amendment to the resolution, please indicate so. If it's an aye, let's go vote. Director Bibi.
Aye.
Okay, you're approving. That means you're approving.
I'm approving.
No.
Approving the amendment.
Then
Oh,
no.
the amendment.
Yeah.
No.
Amendment.
No. No amendment.
Bennett.
No.
Olson.
No, I'll agree to leave it as is.
Say that again. Did you say yes or no?
I will agree to leave it as is, so no.
So no. Director Sorum.
No.
Okay. Director Starks.
Yes.
Director Steigaff.
No.
And I go with a no. So the amendment has not passed. We go back to the original resolution. And I believe we are ready to vote on that resolution, correct?
Correct.
Director Starks.
Okay, if I need to formally put the amendment together before I can have this discussion, I will do that. So I am motion to amend that the first 5 sections of this resolution be voted on separately. And I think Mr. Heisted, or not Heisted, Holman, that's where I stopped, correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, you're making an amendment. That one would work.
Okay.
Okay, so can you just clarify a little bit more what your motion is for all board members? Because I understand, because we already had that conversation
Yeah.
today, but just to give
Well,
more.
do I need a second before I can defend it?
Yes.
Okay, yes. I just wasn't sure if people had understood the motion.
I think that board members need a clarification on exactly what her amendment is, though, before anybody is going to second it or not second it.
Agreed.
Okay, I just got in trouble for doing this earlier, you guys. Okay, so here's
on what you said again.
Okay, I'm amending that the first 5 sections, so the first 5 bullets, be voted on separately than the second 5 bullets. So it divides it into 2.
Splitting the motion.
Thank you.
Splitting them. And then can you clarify those first 5, what they are making reference to?
The elementary early learning services, kids safari, after school programs, and professional development calendar days. Anything having to do with going back the week of January 18th.
Okay. Thank you.
And if anybody wants a reason why, I'd love to share that.
Perhaps we need to before we hear a second. I think people are still trying to
Okay.
understand why.
Well, here's why. Because I have, if you guys can tell, a pretty strong opinion about returning to school January 18th. Okay. But I also have a strong opinion about athletics and activities. And if you're asking me to put those in the same resolution, I can't vote yes or no. Because I'd be voting yes on something I don't agree with, or no on something I don't agree with. So by boxing them into the same decision, I don't have a vote. So that's why I'm asking that they separate. Anybody else that has a yes, yes, or a no, no can just vote twice, but it allows me to split my vote into 2.
Because there are so many items on this resolution, I will second Director Stark's amendment.
Okay. Thank you. So now we have a call for an amendment and a second. So now let's talk more about it. Who would like to go first? Okay, Director Storm.
I don't think it's necessary. I think we've had these situations before, and I don't understand without a definite time on the first 5 of continuing that whenever. I guess the whole thing should be voted on as one. The amendment didn't include any time that the first 5 would be put into effect.
Director Starks, go ahead.
Well, correct, Jim. My original amendment was to change the timeline. And if that had passed, then I could have voted yes on the amendment as a whole. But because that failed, I'm asking a courtesy of my board members to split this into 2 so I can vote yes on one and no on another.
Director Bennett.
Yes, I'm fine either way, but as Director Stark says, as a courtesy, I'm willing to go along with this amendment just so we can move it along, because I think we're getting bogged down in parliamentary proceedings and everything. So let's just vote on this unless anyone else has more conversation. And if it's 2 motions, then let's just do 2 motions. It's all the same to me.
Director Olson.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to have my hand up. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm okay with that too. With going with this amendment, because obviously Director Starks is looking for two different resolutions. It doesn't really make a difference in the way we end up voting at the end, but it gives her the opportunity at least to have a vote. So for that courtesy, I would say yes. So Director
Well,
Starks.
I'm still confused then with the first five when we're voting yes or no on the first five. What does that mean for dates? Do we extend it out to February 1st? But that wasn't in the amendment.
No, Director Sorum, this is not specific to the dates anymore. This is a specific only to the resolution and having the ability of splitting the resolution in two. So we have the first 5 items in one resolution and vote on those, and then have the rest of the items in a second resolution. So if you do not agree with if you want the resolution as it is and you vote on the first resolution that it's being requested, then it does not change how your vote will go at the end. This is just another way of giving Director Starks an opportunity to vote, since she doesn't feel comfortable voting in a resolution that has dates that she does not agree with. Director Bibi? Director Bibi, your microphone is off.
I'm trying to determine that she agrees with one part of it and disagrees with the other. Is that what she's saying?
Correct. And so she doesn't want to have to vote no in the whole resolution because she does not agree with part of it.
Okay, so she agrees with the dates for the activities and athletics to begin, but not for the days of when the children should go back to school. Is that what she's saying?
Director Starks, you want to talk?
Yes, that is correct. Yep. I have a lot of concerns, not just the dates. There's the elementary going back with, I heard way too many, we don't know, we're learning, in order for me to give an affirmative vote to moving forward with elementary going back on the 19th of January. I don't have those same concerns about the athletics going back on the 4th.
Okay. Whatever, I think we just need to get a vote done. And
Well, yeah. So let's go ahead and vote.
Can I just ask can I ask Dr. Starks to clarify something for me though?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So is it out of the 5 things, is it just the timeline that you're wanting to say no to for the first and yes to the second? Director Starks, is there anything else?
No, but I don't know why that matters. I'll just share. I did ask administration in advance of this meeting to separate these out so that I didn't have to have this amendment conversation. And it didn't, it didn't happen in advance of the meeting. Had these been written as 2 separate resolutions, we wouldn't be here. So I know I'm causing confusion and frustration, and I do apologize for that. But I feel like, if I'm locked into a yes vote or a no vote with 10 items that are inherently different from each other, that's a challenge for me. So I appreciate if the board, my fellow board members, would afford me the courtesy to split it so that I can vote separate, but it doesn't change your vote or anything that you need to do going forward.
Correct. Yeah, and I think it's a valid request. So let's go ahead and vote. So those in favor, please say aye. Of this amendment of having the resolution being split into different resolutions. So Director Bibi?
Aye.
Director Bennett?
Aye.
Director Olson?
Aye.
Director Sorum,
Aye.
Director Starks,
Aye.
and Director Steiger.
No.
Okay. And Corman, aye. So this has passed. And now we are going into two different resolutions. So Mr. Holman, please guide me here a little bit because we have two resolutions and previous resolutions. So
what you've got now is the first one up is a resolution. Basically, it starts the same, that the School Board of Independent School District 271 approves and authorizes the administration to accomplish the following, and we're going through the first 5 bullet points.
okay, so that is our current resolution. Okay,
That,
and
yes.
correct, and that's the one we're gonna be voting on. So, but we do need a second for that half of the resolution, correct?
Well, you just passed an amendment that did that, so I think you can
Perfect.
proceed.
Thank you. This is the very first time this happens to me. It's kind of exciting. So all those in favor then of approving this first part of the resolution, please say aye. Director Bibi?
Aye.
Director Bennett?
Aye.
Director Olson?
Aye.
Director Sorum?
Aye.
Director Starks?
No.
And Director Steiger?
Aye.
And Corman, aye. So this resolution passes 6-0. I'm sorry, 6-1. Okay, so now let's move into the second part of the resolution, which indicates all the other items below after item number 6. Okay, so all those in favor of approving this resolution, please say aye. Director Bibi?
Aye.
Is that clear? Okay.
Aye.
Director Bennett?
Aye.
Director Olson?
Aye.
Director Sorum?
Aye.
Director Starks?
Aye.
And Director Steiger?
Aye.
And Corman, aye. So this resolution has passed. Okay. So here we come to the end of our meeting now. So I'd like to move adjournment of the meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Who was that? Director Sorum?
Sure.
Well, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the public as well, community members. Have a good night.
Thank you.